What we know on day 18, Hamas and Israel at war. Hamas releases 2 more hostages on humanitarian and poor health grounds. Emmanuel Macron visits Israel. Don't miss any update. Subscribe my channel for entertainment news. The Israeli military spokesperson Daniel Hagari said on Tuesday that the military was ready and determined for the next stage in the war and was awaiting political instruction. In a social media post, the Israel Defense Force claims to have struck over 400 terrorist targets in the past 24 hours, in what is described as a wide-scale operation to dismantle Hamas terrorist capabilities. Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, has described the 7th of October Hamas attack as one of the worst atrocities of modern times, and accused Hezbollah in Lebanon of playing with fire in Israel's north. He accused Iran of stoking tension between Hezbollah and Israel, and said, "I want to make clear we are not looking for a confrontation in our northern border or with anyone else. We are focused on destroying Hamas infrastructure and bringing our citizens back home. But if Hezbollah will drag us into war, it should be clear that Lebanon will pay the price." Addressing the media during a visit to Israel, Emmanuel Macron said the attack on the 7th of October was an immense shock for the whole planet, especially in France. He said France supported Israel today, tomorrow and the day after, saying the victims of the Hamas attack were killed just because they were Jewish. He said it was a duty of France to fight against terrorist groups. Hamas released 2 more hostages from Gaza on humanitarian and poor health grounds. Nurit Cooper, also known as Nurit Yitzhak, 79, and Yocheved Lifshitz, 85, who were kidnapped along with their husbands from kibbutz Nir Oz, near the Gaza border, on the 7th of October, are now in the care of the Israeli military, the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed. About 1.4 million of Gaza's 2.3 million strong population is now displaced, the UN's humanitarian agency OCHA has said in its latest update, and the shortage of clean drinking water as well as overcrowding has become a major concern. Overnight, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees UNRWA confirmed that another 6 of its staff had been killed in Gaza, bringing the total killed since the 7th of October to 35. It said 40 UNRWA installations had been damaged so far by Israeli airstrikes. In the UK, the junior minister Victoria Atkins told Sky News that the government believes 6 British nationals are being held hostage by Hamas, cautioning, "It's a very fast-moving situation and that figure may or may not change." Germany's anti-Semitism commissioner has condemned the country's recent increase in anti-Jewish violence, warning that it risks transporting the country back to its most horrific times. Felix Klein said he was also worried about an erosion of basic rights as officials sought to crack down on expressions of support for the Palestinian people. The Biden administration does not believe the time is right for a ceasefire in Gaza, according to John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the National Security Council. Speaking to CNN, he said the U.S. position was that all hostages held by Hamas in Gaza must be released first, echoing comments made by President Joe Biden earlier. Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry has said at least 5,087 Palestinians, including 2,055 children, have been killed in Israeli strikes since the 7th of October, with another 15,273 people wounded. It said most of the fatalities had occurred in the southern Gaza Strip, to where Israel's military has ordered Palestinians to evacuate. The claims have not been independently verified. Almost 20,000 people have been internally displaced in South Lebanon and elsewhere since early October, a United Nations agency said on Monday, reflecting escalating violence on the Lebanese-Israeli border. The UN's International Organization for Migration (IOM) said 19,646 people had been displaced inside Lebanon since it began tracking movements on the 8th of October, the day after the assault on Israel by Hamas militants, the AFP news agency reported. A third convoy of aid trucks entered Gaza via the Rafah crossing from Egypt on Monday. On Saturday and Sunday 34 trucks passed through. The UN said aid arriving so far was just 4% of the daily average before the hostilities and that about 100 trucks would be needed daily to meet essential needs in Gaza. Says US, with Hamas still holding hostages, not the time for a ceasefire in Gaza. Some Palestinians returning to north of Gaza owing to lack of food. The US has said now is not the time for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, as the UN reports that some Palestinians who fled their homes in the north of Gaza have returned due to a lack of food and shelter in the south. Don't miss any update. Subscribe my channel for entertainment news. The White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby told CNN on Monday that Israel still had work to do to go after Hamas leadership, echoing comments from the U.S. President, Joe Biden, that any discussions of a ceasefire could only take place if Hamas freed all its hostages in Gaza. The statement from the White House was at odds with comments from UN and EU officials who on Monday called for a humanitarian pause in fighting so that aid could be delivered into Gaza. France's president, Emmanuel Macron, was expected to express solidarity with Israel and call for the preservation of Gaza's civilian population during a visit to Israel on Tuesday. After meeting relatives of French-Israeli citizens killed in Hamas's attack on the 7th of October, he was to hold talks with Israeli leaders and Palestinian officials in the West Bank. The families of 2 Israeli hostages released by Hamas on Monday night celebrated their return. Yocheved Lifshitz, 85, and Nurit Yitzhak, 79, were reunited with their families at a Tel Aviv hospital, where medical staff said both women appeared in good health. Lifshitz told the Ynet news site that Hamas had schooled Israel in its murderous assault. She said she did not know where she had been held in Gaza. They loaded me onto a motorcycle, with one terrorist holding me from the front and the other from behind so that I wouldn't fall. We crossed the border fence into the strip, and at first they held me in the town of Abbasan al-Kabir. After that, I don't know where I was taken. Qatar and Egypt helped to broker the release of the 2 women. Israeli media reported that the US and Qatar were trying to broker a deal in which 50 dual nationals held by Hamas would be released. Meanwhile, Israeli police reportedly detained a prominent Arab Israeli actor, Mesa Abd el-Hadi, for allegedly posting images in support of Hamas. Israeli media said Abd el-Hadi, who appeared in the TV show Baghdad Central and the film World War Z, was arrested on suspicion of incitement and support for terrorism. Concern about the plight of people in Gaza intensified. The director of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees (UNRWA) in Gaza, Thomas White, said shortages of shelter, food and drinking water in the south had forced some residents to return to their homes in the north. Israel delivered sweeping evacuation orders for almost half of Gaza's 2.3 million people on the 13th of October. The UN estimates that almost 2/3 of Gaza's population have been displaced over the last 2 weeks. People have left everything in the north, they have come to the south where they are struggling to find shelter, food is scarce, many people are having to drink unpotable water, so the situation in the south is dire, White told the BBC. The Israeli military bombed a refugee camp in Gaza's north late on Monday, reports said. The IDF said the strike targeted a staging ground for Hamas. Palestinian media reported that 5 people were killed. Gaza's health authority, which is run by Hamas, has said at least 5,087 people have been killed in Israel's 2-week bombardment, many of them children. The conflict broke out after the Palestinian militants attacked southern Israeli communities on the 7th of October, killing 1,400 people and taking 222 hostages into the Strip. On Sunday it emerged that the U.S. had pressed Israel to delay its expected ground assault on Gaza to allow time for the release of more hostages and the delivery of more aid. The Maariv newspaper said the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his generals were at odds over when to launch a ground invasion. Quoting unnamed senior Israeli officials, the Daily said the Israeli leader was delaying it while there was still a possibility of returning the captives, and that the initial phrase of the Israeli offensive, airstrikes, was not yet exhausted. Netanyahu's office put out a statement on Monday night denying the reports of friction, saying, "The Prime Minister, the Defense Minister and the IDF Chief of Staff are working in close and full cooperation, there is total and mutual trust." Israel pounded hundreds of targets in Gaza from the air on Monday, with a military spokesperson suggesting there was no intention of curbing its strikes on the densely populated area. "The path is a path of unrelenting attacks, damaging Hamas everywhere and in every way," said the Israeli Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, adding, "We are well prepared for the ground operations." U.S. officials speaking to the New York Times said the Biden administration was concerned that Israeli forces did not have a clear military plan of action to achieve their goal of eradicating Hamas. The Pentagon has sent military advisors, including a Marine Corps general versed in urban warfare, to Israel to aid in its war planning and has sent air defense systems to the Middle East ahead of the anticipated ground assault into Gaza. 1,100 Israelis and Palestinians killed as Israel pounds Gaza after Hamas attack. Israel pounded the Palestinian enclave of Gaza on Sunday, killing hundreds of people in retaliation for one of the bloodiest attacks in its history when militia group Hamas killed 700 Israelis and abducted dozens more. Hamas fighters' rampage through Israeli towns on Saturday was the deadliest such incursion since Egypt and Syria's attacks in the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago and has threatened to ignite another conflagration in the long-running conflict. In response, Israeli air strikes hit housing blocks, tunnels, a mosque and homes of Hamas officials in Gaza, killing more than 400 people, including 20 children, in keeping with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's vow of mighty vengeance. The price the Gaza Strip will pay will be a very heavy one that will change reality for generations, said Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in the town of Ofakim, which suffered casualties and had hostages taken. Beyond blockaded Gaza, Israeli forces and Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah militia exchanged artillery and rocket fire, while in Egypt, 2 Israeli tourists were shot dead along with a guide. Appeals for restraint came from around the world, though Western nations largely stood by Israel while Iran, Hezbollah and protesters in various Middle Eastern nations lauded Hamas. In southern Israel on Sunday, Hamas gunmen were still fighting Israeli security forces more than 24 hours after their surprise, multi-pronged assault of rocket barrages and bands of gunmen who overran army bases and invaded border towns. "My 2 little girls, they're only babies. They're not even 5 years old and 3 years old," said Yoni Asher, who recounted seeing video of Palestinian gunmen seizing his wife and 2 small daughters after she took them to visit her mother. Uri David told a news conference he spent 30 minutes on the phone with his 2 daughters, Tara and Odiah, during an attack until they no longer responded to him and that he did not know their fate. "I heard shooting, shouting in Arabic. I told them to lie on the ground and hold hands," he said, breaking down in tears. Israel's military, which faces awkward questions for not thwarting the attack, said it had regained control of most infiltration points along security barriers, killed hundreds of attackers and taken dozens more prisoner. The military said it had deployed tens of thousands of soldiers around Gaza, a narrow strip of land that is home to 2.3 million Palestinians, and was starting to evacuate Israelis around the frontier. "This is my 5th war. The war should stop. I don't want to keep feeling this," said Kassab al-Attar, a Palestinian wheelchair user in Gaza whose brothers carried him to shelter. Israel has not released an official toll, but its media said at least 700 people were killed, children among them. Military spokesperson Daniel Hagari called it the worst massacre of innocent civilians in Israel's history. Several Americans were killed by Hamas attackers, a White House National Security Council spokesperson confirmed, saying the U.S. would continue to monitor the situation closely. The shocking flare-up may undermine U.S.-backed moves towards normalizing relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, a security realignment that could threaten Palestinian hopes of self-determination in Hamas' main backer, Iran. Tehran's other main regional ally, Lebanon's Hezbollah, fought a war with Israel in 2006 and said its guns and rockets stand with Hamas. With debris from the attacks still strewn around southern towns and border communities on Sunday, Israelis were reeling from the sight of bloodied bodies in streets, cars and even their homes. About 30 missing Israelis attending a dance party that was attacked by gunmen emerged from hiding on Sunday, Israeli media reported, putting the death toll at the outdoor gathering at 260. Palestinian fighters took dozens of hostages to Gaza, including soldiers and civilians, children and the elderly. A second Palestinian militant group, Islamic Jihad, said it was holding more than 30 of the captives. The capture of so many Israelis, some pulled through security checkpoints or driven bleeding into Gaza, is another conundrum for Netanyahu after past episodes when hostages were exchanged for many Palestinian prisoners.